My name is Deborah Dyrks. I was born in Kansas, about 50 miles outside of Wichita. Well, my background, my profession was breeding, preservation, Bedouin horses. My father was a peace activist during World War II, and that was very difficult because we are of German background. The Mennonite religion is a pacifist religion, so they don't believe in war at all. And after my junior year, I got married and moved to Boston. I was 17. My first job after I got married was working as a governess. But after that, I had quite a few jobs before we were in Colorado. And at the point that my husband graduated with his doctorate, we moved out on a small farm. And a couple of years later, I started working with the preservation of the Benisham horses. Jointly, probably, we have around 150 articles published on the history of the Arabian horse. It was through the Arabian horse that I eventually was introduced to Islam. I was a Mennonite. When I got married, I joined the Methodist Church, which is the church that my husband was ordained into the diaconate of. So, not at the time that we got married, later he was ordained into the diaconate. And we studied a lot of religion. While he was going to school, a lot of his classes I could sit in on, and I really enjoyed doing that. So there was a lot of studying that went into religion. And eventually you have to decide what you do believe and what you don't. And both of us came to some decisions about what we believed in, and where it agreed with most of Christianity and where it was a little different. And it was that background of being sort of an atypical Christian that I brought with me into Islam. I really didn't know enough about Islam. My exposure to Islam really did come through the horses, where we would be studying how horses were treated by the Bedouin tribes and this sort of thing. It would have been about 91 that I started to hunt for, well, maybe 90. I was hunting for to divide up two people who were sort of being run together in the literature from like 1890, okay? Anyway, I was trying to figure out which accolades belonged to which man. Muhammad Ali Pasha Sharif and Muhammad Ali Pasha. And in the horse literature, they had been sort of run together. And I had asked a friend of mine who used to be a professor of Middle East history, and he couldn't get any information. I had gone through the interlibrary loan. I had read all the history books in English, but my problem was the good history books weren't written in English. So I had asked this friend, and he was a retired professor, and he had sheep and goats on his little 5 acres that he raised. And he said, you know, I have people who come out and slaughter sheep and goats at my farm, and they are from the Middle East. So I will ask them if they know the difference. So I wrote down the names of the two gentlemen and this sort of thing. And a month went by and I had heard nothing back from him. And one day he called and he said, I found somebody who knows the difference between those two gentlemen. He says, I asked him, and then it took me 15 minutes to get him to shut up so I could tell him that I didn't want to know. And I thought, oh, this is just a great start, But the gentleman really was, He was actually from Palestine, and he was our introduction to Muslims in the Denver area. It was quite a long while after that. He volunteered to translate some hujjah, the articles that had come with the ancestors of our horses, had come over from Arabia. And we got to know him and his family and several other families that were in the Denver Ummah. And then after that, we decided we would go on a discovery trip for Arabian horses to the Middle East. Now, over those 2 years, we were reading the Quran, we were learning, we were entertaining Muslims in our home. We had learned the dietary restrictions and how to comply with them and this sort of thing. But most of our social life had slowly transferred from being with a lot of Americans to being with a lot of mainly immigrant Muslims. We went overseas. We both said Shahada overseas. When we came back, I guess while we were overseas, we had made the decision. We traveled with another historian, and she was a Christian and still is. But while we were overseas, we dressed in a fashion not to offend anyone. So we were wearing long skirts and covering our hair with scarves. And that was an important part of sort of learning about the culture. And so when we came back, we had to decide how we were going to handle things. In fact, I remember that we got on the plane, and once we were on the plane, my friend took off her scarf and put it in her purse, and she said, "We're on the plane, you can take it off." And I said, "I don't think so. I think I'm just going to continue to wear it and see how it goes." So when we came back, I was dressing differently, which was noticed by this tiny farming community that we lived in. I think at that time, Kiowa had about 249 people, I think the sign said when you came into town. So it was a tiny community. Some people were just thinking that I was wearing the clothes because I had just come back from the trip. I guess in general, people were, it's just, they knew me, so it's just Deb, it's just, you know. But others were, I had one friend who called and said, "I can't be your friend anymore. Those clothes make my skin crawl." You know. So some was very painful, and a lot I just continued to do my horses and to do the things that I needed to do there. Yeah, there was a minister in town who would not look at me, he would not greet me. I went into the post office and he was coming out, and I said, "Hello," and he just, it was very pointed. There were some people who made negative comments, but I was involved with the Arabian horse, and I was writing articles, and some people were uncomfortable. It may have cost us some sales. I don't, there's no way to know. But most people were, whoa, that's different. I didn't know what to expect when I traveled the first time overseas, and I hadn't really, I guess I didn't have a preconceived idea other than the Muslims that we had met and become friends with. So no, it didn't really change my perspective that way. It did change my perspective in watching and hearing things that as an American I realized I had been overlooking, such as what movies do you think of when you think of a Christmas movie? All right. Do you include Home Alone? Now I was selecting movies for young Muslim children that were around me. And I'm going, well, now wait a minute. Home Alone has all the Christmas background. 1, 2, and 3 have Christmas background. Yeah, there's just, for that matter, the movie Die Hard, which it has a Christmas background. It's not appropriate for children anyway, but I never even thought of those movies as being Christian related or anything like that they were carrying a subtle message in there. Only later did I go, oh yeah, there's all of this that we don't really think of. I mean, it's not Rudolph, I think everything impressed me the most. Just adjusting to dealing with things in a little different way, to realizing that you always need a contract, to, these sorts of things. As I grew up, there was a handshake was your bond. And there was emphasis put on that you had to honor that, but also that was something that you honor in everyone else and anticipate honoring. And so to draw up a contract was sort of, well, does that mean handshake isn't your bond anymore? When I entered Islam, it put a whole different focus on contract, and it took it out of that realm. And that was very nice. We have a lot of countries that are presented as being Islamic countries, but none that meet that standard. And people get I guess they become misinformed, not only by our media here, which is a problem, but by that whole concept that this is a Muslim country. Just because a country has many wonderful Muslim people in it doesn't mean that the acts of that government are going to be in line with what Islam allows. And so that is one of the problems that really generates both from there and from here. I suppose the biggest problem that, from my perspective, is that we have a tendency to present the Ummah as a cohesive, one-dimensional thing. And the Ummah is not a cohesive, one-dimensional thing. We have most of the mosques, most of the organizations that are Islamic organizations are headed by immigrants. So when our media goes to the head of an organization to get information, we are putting on the face of the TV someone with an accent, someone that most Americans identify as a foreigner, rather than someone who they can identify with as an American. And I think that that's part of the PR problem that the Ummah has. I think also that we have a problem with mosques being trying to maybe, according to the studies done by CARE, I think it's about 30% of our mosques are trying to keep the culture of one ethnicity or one nation. That means that 1/3 of our mosques, or nearly 1/3 of our mosques, are excluding everyone who doesn't come from that nation or that ethnicity. And I see this as a real problem. We need our mosques to be user-friendly. And that is what I would like to see America, work on. Well, there's many things that the Islamic world brought to the Western world and to all of the world, including most of the classics. We lost them in Greek and in Latin, but they were translated into Arabic. And so most of the classics of literature that a person thinks of, they have been translated back into Greek and Latin from the Arabic, because there was a time when Baghdad was the center of learning. And these manuscripts, alhamdulillah, they were preserved there. But most Westerners don't realize that that's how their classics came to them. They came through the Arabic. And I guess another thing that comes from the Islamic world that I have treasured are the Beni Sham horses, the horses of the Bedouins. I think that the East and West cultures are a lot closer in person, especially out in the country, than they are in the big city or on TV. I think we tend not to see, just because if you take the modest dress of a Muslim woman, there are those who cover completely in one country or another country's outfit, and many of us who use combinations of modest dress from many places. There are those who wear the hijab, there are those who don't. And I think for those who don't wear the hijab, you cannot tell walking down the street if you are meeting a Christian, a Jew, a Muslim. You just have no clue. And I don't think that most people realize that. I think they expect for a Muslim to be covered, and so they don't recognize the rest. I would say you spread Islam with your life, not with your words. It is your doing. Those of us, especially those of us who live in this country, but all across the world, it is our actions. People see us, they realize we're Muslims, and they see that, and they may not see it or know another Muslim. So whatever you do, that is what they think Islam is. So your actions always have to be such that it puts a good portrayal of Islam forward. So when Allah gives you the right to choose, that's your choice. And that is where I would say the whole crux of the matter has to lie. Just may Allah give all of you a blessed and beautiful Ramadan.